up, everybody? How's it going out there? Thinker St. James here. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So, today we're going to be doing something that I was going to do as a video. We're going to do it as a stream instead. Actually, it was going to be a stream and a video separately, but I'm just going to wrap it all into one because it all is sort of related, and these are all things that just broke after the event last night, UFC 324. So, interesting situation here, of course, regarding the Alex Hernandez versus Michael Johnson fight, and we'll get into all of the details of it, but just going to kind of keep it casual, even though these are serious subject matters here. We're going to watch some videos a little bit later that are all related to this betting stuff that's going on in general, more of general information kind of stuff with the videos, but we'll start off with the details of the Hernandez situation because this just seems to be something that is now happening more and more. If you recall, the first major UFC betting scandal was the Shailan Nordenbeke incident, and that was a couple of years ago, James Krause and all of that. Then the Isaac Dulgarian situation happened only a few months ago. So you have the gap between the first one and the second one being somewhat significant. Then the second one and now this third one is much shorter. And obviously, with the way that sports betting has evolved and gotten so popular and very mainstream now, it would seem that we're going to be dealing with these kinds of things more and more. And I'm just wondering if this is the new normal, that we're just going to have fights pulled regularly based on irregularities when it comes to the betting lines and insider information getting leaked. So we'll get into all of the details here in a second. Before we do that, I got to check in with all of you guys, of course. And Beeb is here early, as promised. Appreciate you, brother. Thank you for being here. Won't be on for long, but definitely a good time. Yep, absolutely. No problem, man. Yep, we're going to keep it, like I said, try to keep it kind of casual. I just, Sundays are always a little bit of a reset day for me. So kind of pushing it a little bit to be on, but that's why we're going to try to keep the energy sort of even, still recovering from all of the festivities last night. So all good. Chase made you a mod. Hey, great, dude. Congratulations. Well deserved, my friend. Go over there and keep Chase's chat in order. That's a good deal. You deserve it. Nav is here. Thank you, Nav. Chama indeed, bro. And of course, shout out to you, Nav, for bringing some of these videos to my attention. That's going to be the stuff that we'll get into a little bit later in the stream. So, to start off here, this is from MMA Mania. And this, I believe, is from just before the event, I want to say. Or actually, yeah, just a couple hours before 324, which is when we found out that the Hernandez and Johnson fight was canceled. This is another betting scandal. Undercard bout scrapped last minute amidst concerns over irregular betting. Said that weird. So yeah. Again, a situation that we're very familiar with at this point. A lightweight fight between Michael Johnson and Alex Hernandez has been removed from tonight's UFC 324 card live on Paramount inside. Yeah, I like that. I guess MMA Mania is also sponsored because you have to word this in a way that's like promo as well, right? We've had this fight removed from UFC 324, which is going to be live on Paramount Plus from inside the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. It's like... Okay. Yeah, have to make sure they get all their talking points in. The promotion announced the news Saturday afternoon, but did not name a specific reason as to why the 155-pound matchup was canceled, leaving fight fans to draw their own conclusions. We certainly have drawn our own conclusions based on what we know now. On Friday, a few members of the MMA betting community noticed some irregular betting activity for Johnson versus Hernandez. There was some late money that came in on Menace that turned the fight into an even odds affair. That's the biggest point from all of this, is that this went from Johnson being a pretty significant underdog to being essentially a pick'em fight between him and Hernandez. To illustrate that, I mean, you can see this in the tweet here. Due to some irregular betting patterns, we will be keeping the limits lower than usual on tonight's Michael Johnson versus Alex Hernandez bout. Additionally, there will not be props on this fight. That's very common that when these fights have irregular betting patterns, prop bets are canceled because generally if there is an actual fix in place, there is one specific outcome that the fixers are looking for. So the books will take all of the props off the table to make it so that there's not a reaping of the benefits of any one specific outcome to the fight. So anyone find it strange that at the post presser, Justin wasn't asked anything about the eye pokes? Yeah, is it strange? No. I mean, is it sad? Yes. Is it strange? No, because the organization cherry picks their journalists. So I'm never surprised when there's not hard-hitting questions. I'm surprised that Dana got asked about this situation at the post-fight press conference, and we will get into his response to all of this in a minute as well. But so that's the big takeaway from here, is just to get into the subject matter. This article goes into a little bit more detail, about the Bulgarian situation that we briefly touched on. Of course, I've done plenty of coverage on the Bulgarian situation, which you can go back and watch on the channel. But to illustrate the line movement on the Hernandez versus Johnson fight, we've got this tweet from Dave Gravity, someone I'm not familiar with, but I think this illustrates this pretty well. Something very weird is happening with the odds for the Johnson versus Hernandez fight today at UFC 324. Of course, this is from yesterday. There's been a 234-point swing on Johnson. That's massive, sharp money coming in, something the public doesn't know here. We'll get into all of that in just a second, but you see the image here. These are the lines, and you can see that on the 22nd, this is at midnight on the 22nd, Johnson opens. This is, the opening of the betting lines. Johnson is a plus 132. Hernandez is a minus 158. That stays pretty well consistent for the next 12 hours, and then the next 12 hours after that. Then once you get into the next 12 hours after that, so this is now noon on the 23rd, there's a little bit of movement, but that's within the realm of reason here. So to go from a plus 132 to a plus 119, that makes sense. That's normal movement because people are betting on Johnson, seeing that he's an underdog, seeing, hey, Johnson, a good underdog, just had a win over Bahamundes. Somebody who is a power striker and decent guy, even if he is at older age, people saying, I'll roll the dice on Michael Johnson. But then you get to January 24th at midnight. This is now the day before the fight, or the day of the fight, rather, day of the fight. So this is midnight day of the fight, and you go from a plus 119 to a minus 102 with nothing in between. So not only have you gone from plus money to minus money, but the shift over is insanely sharp, as the tweet had said. And then that stays consistent up until 3 p.m. day of the fight. Going into later into that same day, rather. And you can see on the Hernandez side, huge favorite as huge in relative terms to this. A significant favorite, I guess is a better way to say it. Significant favorite at a minus 158, minus 159, 158. Again, these are very consistent up until this point. Little shift for him here, and then dramatic changes over here as well, because now the lines have all rejumbled themselves, and really the differentials here tell the whole tale. So, this summary that he has done here, I think that this is something that this person put together, and shout out to this Dave Gravity person if this is something that he himself did, because this is a nice illustration. I wish more books and journalists and people would do something like this, because this is a really a nice summation of all of how this played out. But the summary here, Johnson goes from a plus 132 to a minus 102, and Hernandez goes from minus 158 to a minus 115, essentially making it close to, if not a pick'em fight. So the movement, very significant. And then, of course, there's this also from Dave Gravity, a correction on all of this. And these are illustrating the alerts that went off here. Significant movement, monitor closely. Event, Michael Johnson versus Alex Hernandez. Fighter Hernandez, opening at minus 147, currently at a minus 108. So this showing that this has gotten even worse. 39-point movement, 14.3%. These are very large moves. And then, the more extreme movement here on Johnson, because of the situation and the circumstances that we'll get into in just a second. But the extreme movement, potential insider info. Event, Michael Johnson versus Alex Hernandez. Fighter Michael Johnson, opening at a plus 125, currently at a minus 113. Movement of 238 points, a 16.8% movement rate. That is just wild. So, all of this would be rather concerning to people who are following these things and people who care about the integrity of this sport. How's everyone's day so far? James, you good, bro? Seem a little serious, not your jolly self. I'm just tired. But no, yeah. And this is also serious subject matter, of course. But no, yeah. I'm great. I'm doing good. I think I was kind of spreading myself a little bit thin by coming on live today. But either way, no, I'm doing great, man. Hope you're doing well as well. But so yeah, to get back into all of this. Put the headphones on for this one, because now we have Dana at the post-fight presser for 324, and he is asked about this and confirms what we were all suspecting about why this fight was eventually canceled. That's the other portion here that bridges the gap. Obviously, this fight was scrapped, and we will get into the reason why.
I don't know yet.
Yeah. Lastly, for me, we did have a fight cancellation today. Not a lot of details on the information of what happened there. There's speculation that maybe this was a wagering flag. What can you tell us?
That's what it is. Happened again. We got called from the Gaming Integrity Service, and I said, I'm not doing this shit again. So we pulled the fight.
Dana, I remember when Paddy first arrived.
That's pretty much it as far as what he says in here, I believe. There might be another question about it, but we're not going to go through and watch the entire post-fight press conference. But either way, really, that's all you need to know, is that the organization saw this irregularity, the stuff that we just went over, and pulled the fight. So the big question then becomes, what is the irregularity? What happened? We had speculation that Hernandez was injured, but how and why did we know that? Well, you can take this for what it is, and of course this is not a often very, very reputable source or considered a reputable source, but Reuben Carter has what he claims are more details on the situation, and he says, Alexander Hernandez was injured going into the fight, and someone in his camp leaked this info to a bettor on Instagram, which caused the suspicious betting activity, and therefore the UFC decided to subsequently pull the fight from the UFC 324 card. This is the stuff that I have been concerned about for a while, is pretty much exactly what happened in the Shailan Nordembeke situation, and what we're seeing, I think, more and more now. Now, with the Dulgarian situation, it would appear to have been a little bit different. The Dulgarian situation seems like that was Isaac Dulgarian literally influencing the outcome of the fight, he himself, intentionally and personally doing that, allegedly. That's what it looked like from the outside. But with the Shailan Nordembeke situation, That's very similar to what this is. That was Shailene Nordembeke was injured going into that fight, and somebody, potentially James Krause, leaked that information to, I think in that case, his Discord, and that's how the fix was in. So what I say to all of this, and why I titled the stream the way that I did, was because this does appear to be something that is happening more and more, and this is that slightly middle ground when it comes to fight fixing. And not a middle ground in the sense that it's not still fight fixing, but like in the middle ground as to where the blame is being laid and how you go about rooting through to stamp out this problem, and why I think that this might end up being somewhat of a new normal situation is because what you end up getting with this is a little bit more of a game of whack-a-mole as to how you can attribute and trace back this information getting out. What I'm saying is that when you have a traditional fight fix like what we were talking about with Dolgarian, where it comes from the fighter themselves, that can be attributed obviously to them, and they should shoulder the blame for that. But when you have a situation like this, now this one, of course, if that was a specific person in the Hernandez team that leaked the information to a betting person on Instagram, then that can be traced back to that one person. But if that was not the case, let's say that this was happening in text messages or some other, or would say that it was happening on Telegram or through some other kind of a dark web sort of situation where it's not as easily traceable. How are you going to actually make any kind of tangible connections as to how the information got leaked? You have people, you have a team of several people, sometimes 5, 6, 10 people in a fighter's camp. All it takes is one of those people to have an encrypted method of communication to get the information out to the public in some capacity. And now the fix is in. And how do you trace that back? So, I mean, really, this is what makes this kind of a big situation, and concerning as far as the integrity of the sport goes, because how are you going to be actually putting a stop to these things? A fighter gets injured. There's insider information on that. Someone in the team has a way to covertly get that information out to someone else. If someone else then takes that information and runs with it, how do you then trace that lineage back to the original source and put a stop to any of this? It's what I'm really getting at with the entirety of what we're talking about here today. Is it happening more, or is it just more people are getting caught now? That's another part of the question here, Beeb. That's exactly it. Is how much has this already been happening? How much can we expect it to continue happening? And now with sports betting being as big as it is, can we ever expect there to be integrity in the sport? This is from Ruben Carter as well here. This is a post that apparently was going around from this account on Instagram, the Starched. I guess this is a sports betting person. But this is the description of a post on Instagram, and you can see here, Johnson by knockout is his recommendation because rumors are Hernandez is compromised. This is before the fight was canceled, obviously, but also before it was made, before the lines had shifted, before it was made aware that this compromise was a wider spread thing that was going around, a wider spread piece of information that was being disseminated. So this is a concerning situation here. Now, it is kind of funny with this specific post that the Starched account pretty much got everything else wrong here. Maybe, I think he got 1 or 2 correct. But he was not wrong about this one situation, at least, with Hernandez potentially being compromised. So we'll get into the rest of it. Meat Rocket, how are you, sir? You wish Sarah Toby was here? I do, too. I wish she was always here. Cookie Monster Trader, is Justin Gaethje the greatest interim champion of all time? The greatest interim champion of all time. That's an interesting kind of title to bestow on anybody. But, I mean, I would say no, only because Tom Aspinall defended his interim championship several times. And that's an unfortunate thing for Tom Aspinall. But if we're strictly going on those parameters where it's who is the best interim champ of all time, I think Tom has to, by default, be the best because he was the interim champ for longest and had to defend it multiple times, which is kind of a ridiculous thing in of itself that he was put in that position. But that would be my answer. Justin Gaethje, probably a great interim champion based on everything that we saw. I don't know how he's going to fare against Ilia Topuria. I think that, I mean, based on what we saw, this is kind of what I said on the live stream last night, but based on what we saw in that fight, I do not have tremendous confidence that he's going to do anything differently than when anybody else who fought Ilia Topuria did, and thus I think the outcome will be very similar for him as it was to Ilia Topuria's former opponents. So that's my answer to that. All right, so that is all of the information that we really have right now as far as the Hernandez situation goes. That's why I was going to do this as a video, and I probably could have gotten it out just as a quick video. And maybe I should have, considering that we're not going to have a lot else to go over. But that's the crux of all of that. Now, the other thing that I do have is something that Nav brought to the equation. And this was actually before all of this stuff with Hernandez came out. So I was going to do this as the stream today, and we'll get into all of the video content here. So this is Yanni the Greek. Of course, you might be familiar with him. He is a betting expert, quote unquote, on the UFC's broadcasts. And he was talking a little bit about parlays and how unfair the advantage is skewed when it comes to the book versus the bettor. And I'll let this run in just a second. Did Frank Mir defend an interim title, or am I I think Frank Mir might have defended an interim title. True. Yeah, good call if that's the case. I think that might be correct. Maybe I'm misremembering too. But either way, I mean, yeah, if you go back, I mean, if you want to go back into like deep lore when it comes to interim champs, I mean, there are probably some other ones that might be in the running there. But I think Tom has to take the cake based on what he was subjected to. So, again, Yanni the Greek, I guess he's talking about football here. But what he says in relation to sports betting in general is what we're really interested in. So Nav said that this was around the 14-minute mark. So we'll start it around here and just see what we got.
Understand, knowing that that's what everyone's looking at, those are the books that are used to dummy up sides and totals and prompts.
Good point.
Like if I know everybody's looking at Pinnacle and they're copying the Pinnacle line, that's the shop I'm going to use to dummy up. If I know they're copying Circa for MMA, I'm going to dummy up Circa's MMA. If I know they're piggybacking, Westgate's NFL, I'm going to make sure I use Westgate to dummy some NFL up. So that happens a lot. Got to be cautious there.
Yeah, that's great info.
Well, yeah, hold on. Let's
Let
rewind that because I'm curious what he's talking about with all of that. Let me start a little bit earlier. If you have to defend an interim title, you should straight up just strip whatever champion. I agree. Yeah, I agree. What is the point? I've never really even understood the point of an interim title, to be perfectly honest. The interim title, to me, is literally just a glorified solidification of being the number one contender. That's all that it is. I mean, if you're an interim champion, you're basically saying you are the placeholder champion until you can fight for the actual title and unify it. So what's the point? That's why I personally call it the silver belt. And you'll hear me say that. I said that last night when Justin Gaethje won. I said that's great. He gets to hold the silver medal right now. He holds the silver belt because all that is basically saying you are next up for your. It's like getting the. Listen, odd. This is an odd analogy, but follow me here. Back in the mid to late 2000s, early 2010s, there was an attraction at Disney World called American Idol, the American Idol Experience, right? And basically what it was that you'd go to Disney World and you would go on a mock version of American Idol. And the prize for going on that show at Disney World was you'd get a golden ticket. And what that got you was it got you the opportunity to skip the line and audition directly for the American Idol panel for the actual American Idol show. So the golden ticket at Disney World got you skipping the line so that you could go straight to the front of the line and audition for Simon Cowell and Paula Abdul and all of those people. That's really, I think, an apt comparison to what the interim title is. The interim title says you've competed at this, with this other person, whatever, in this case, obviously, Patty Pimblett and Justin Gaethje, you've competed in that competition. So you get to skip the line over all of the other competitors in your division to go straight to the champion. Does that make sense? I think it actually makes pretty good sense. I think that I actually kind of cooked with that. Thoughts on O'Malley's performance? I think Merab, Umar, Yan would all beat him right now. Is he the fourth best? That's an interesting way to look at it. I thought O'Malley's performance was certainly underwhelming. Of course, we're going to talk about all of this on tomorrow's stream, where we have the podcast on Monday. So yeah, Cookie Monster Trader, if you're not already subscribed, make sure that you're subscribed and you can check us out on the podcast because we're going to break down every one of the fights. But in short, what I said about O'Malley's performance is that in that third round, he finally started turning up, and that he finally looked himself a little bit. But I did not think that the way that he approached that fight, if that was intentionally calculated to scale for late game, it was not a good look. And I mean, I think that he took the first round, but the first round was so low output on both sides that it really was based on just being a little bit better in the moment than Song. And then the third round looked good, but if he had done third round fighting throughout the entirety of the fight, then this would not be the conversation right now. So in short, do I think that all of those fighters that you just listed would beat O'Malley right now? Yeah, probably. But I think that really the bigger issue is not him being beaten by those other fighters. I think the bigger issue is that this was supposed to be the solidification of O'Malley as a force to be reckoned with within the UFC and within the bantamweight division, and he did not accomplish that. So that, I think, is the bigger takeaway, because the thing is, when it comes to the fights that you mentioned there, or the potential fights that you mentioned there, he might lose all of those fights. But right now, what he was supposed to do was solidify himself to say, I am worthy of fighting all of these people. I am of the caliber of fighting all of these people. When you have a close decision win over Song Yadong, who I thought was potentially going to win that fight, and I think that it was pretty close, obviously. He certainly took at least one of those rounds, second round being the prevailing thought. And the first round was not so one-sided that it couldn't have been a split decision. So what I'm saying is that this was supposed to be a dominant win for Sean O'Malley. This was supposed to be something that was going to set him apart from the rest of the pack. And by fighting in the way that he did, I don't think that he accomplished that. I do not think that he set himself away from the rest of the pack. I think that he is now just swirling in the middle of, the top of the rankings now amongst the other fighters that you mentioned. And because of that, that is the unfortunate thing for him. The bloom is off of the Sean O'Malley rose, unfortunately. What do we call the BMF belt then? I consider it a step above the WWE belt. Yeah, no, the BMF belt is the People's Champion belt. That's what that is. The BMF belt is fight like crazy and put on a good performance belt. That's what that is. And I think that there's nothing wrong with having something like that. I used to feel the same way that you did. I used to think that it was a paper belt just to try to, conjure up more, more hype for the UFC fights, just to have another belt that's not a divisional belt, so that you had another selling point for events. And I do think that it is that still to an extent. However, I do see the value of saying fight your hardest and you can win this as your prize. And we've gotten some good fights out of it. So I'm not super upset that the BMF belt exists now that we've seen what it can accomplish, but make no mistake, it is just a piece of paper at the end of the day. Really, I think that the BMF belt now accomplishes the same thing that they are now accomplishing with the $25,000 finish bonus, which I think is one of the best things that the UFC has done in a while. I think that that is a tremendously good addition to their operation, because finishes are what we are supposed to be seeing in this sport. You saw on 324 that even with a finish incentive, you're still not going to get finishes. So I like the idea that a finish bonus is also something that you can give to the fighters as a prize for finishing their fights, but also it's now something that you can have as an accolade as well. Think about it in those terms. I don't think people are really thinking about it that way, but think about it like this. When Chase and I are on the podcast and we say Justin Gaethje has 12 performance bonuses, that means something. That's something that is a touch point for people when you're thinking about this sport. He has 12 performance bonuses. That is something that signals to you that that is a worthwhile fighter that is going to go out there and put on a performance that you can expect greatness out of. Now you can say that person has 12 finish bonuses. That speaks volumes. You know, before, yes, you could still say, oh, that guy has 12 finishes, but it's optics in this sport. So to say he has 12 finish bonuses, that dude won X amount of dollars, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars because he finishes his fights. I think that that's a good deal. So I say that to say that that accomplishes to me almost like the BMF belt is almost the topped out version of what I just described. That guy finishes his fights so much, he's got the BMF belt. That guy is such a tremendous fighter. They gave him a belt because of that. Because he didn't have to earn it the same way as let me take that back. He didn't have to earn it the same way. He did have to earn it, of course, but he didn't have to earn it the same way that other fighters have to earn their belts as divisional belts. He earned his belt by fighting so hard that he got himself into a position to be in a belt situation. See what I'm saying? Paula was fucking adorable. Just saying. Appreciate you, Michael. Hope you're having a good day, brother. Just a heads up, James. I might not stop by for tomorrow's stream. I have some homework I need to finish up. Oh, dude, no worries. You never have to worry about stopping by for any streams, bro. Don't worry about that at all. Don't worry about that at all, my guy. You were always good. You were always good. Dude, take the time that you need to get your homework right, bro. That's way more important. Way more important. All right, so let's start this little portion over or a little bit farther back when it comes to Yanni here, because I'm interested in what he's talking about when it comes to pumping up the books, and then we're going to get into a piece of interview footage from a little bit later on here that I think is going to put everything into perspective.
Different accounts, so I keep my eye open for those, because again, anytime you're able to get free money, they're going to lock it down. But you can sort of tell which are legit, and the ones I shared are definitely legit because they're in multiple accounts.
This is your public service reminder. If you're playing on DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM, don't do that. Let the syndicates do that. You will get your book. You will get your book shut down really quick. It's the number one way.
You want to be able to bet $3.23 a prop. That's how you bet $3.23 a prop.
And here's what a lot don't understand. Knowing that that's what everyone's looking at, those are the books that are used to dummy up sides and totals. And Caesars had 2.5, and the books, the recreational bettors, they usually don't start betting the props till tomorrow and then Sunday. Some of the stuff that stuck out as far as props go, they like Puka over rushing yards, under multiple accounts.
Sorry, I should have.
Who else?
I apologize, guys. I should have queued this up a little bit better, but I'm trying to find where he's starting to talk about like the actual pumping of the books and like where that conversation started, because I think that that's the most important part of what we're looking at here.
Did I see? I think I saw, was Dave Mason talking about, or one of the books was talking about the over rushing yards for shot a yard. 1.5. Caesars had 2.5.
Okay, here we go.
So
I think that this is
because it was different rushing yards.
All right, we'll start it there. O'Malley and Sandhagen are in the same spot. It's time for that fight to happen. That's literally Cookie Monster. That's literally the fight that I said that they should make. Yeah. That's I after the O'Malley fight. That's the exact fight I said. Yeah, he was he was navigating his career. O'Malley, I'm talking about. He when it came to the Cheeto fight, he probably should have been fighting Corey Sandhagen at the time. But now that they have both lost to Merab, and Sean had the performance that he had last night, I think that is definitely the fight to make. So I agree with you.
For Shahid, because it was different at different books. I know MGM put it out at 0.5 yard and got steamed. And then I think MGM had like 2.5. DraftKings had 1.5. Caesars had 2.5. So different prices all over the board on that. But they were betting the over on Rashid Shahid. Those are the prompts that I just shared that I saw in multiple accounts. Now, there's obviously going to be some other prompts that I don't have the confidence that they're legit, because I see it all the time in the accounts. They're betting both sides of prompts where, but they're getting good numbers on both. They'll go, over 1.5 plus 105, and then they'll go, under 1.5 plus 102. So they'll have plus on both at different accounts. So I keep my eye open for those, because again, anytime you're able to get free money, they're going to lock it down. But you can, sort of tell which are legit, and the ones I shared are definitely legit because they're in multiple accounts.
So that's interesting that there are some, I guess he's saying some books have props on both sides at plus money, and people are recognizing that, picking that up, and then at some point the books are getting wise to it and shutting those down. It's interesting that they would even get themselves into a position like that, the books, because why would, you'd think that the odds makers would be aware of that early on and realize that that's essentially free money, like he's saying, and not make that the case. I don't know. Maybe they just offer that and then they take one away. I guess maybe that's what he's saying, is that they offer plus money on both and then see where the money's coming in and then take one of them away, or take them both away based on what the actual betting looks like thereafter.
This is your public service reminder. If you're playing on DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM, don't do that. Let the syndicates do that. You will get your book shut down really quick. It's the number one way.
You want to be able to bet $3.23 a prop. That's how you bet $3.23 a prop.
And here's what a lot don't understand. Knowing that that's what everyone's looking at, those are the books that are used to dummy up sides and totals and prompts.
Good point.
Like, if I know everybody's looking at Pinnacle and they're copying the Pinnacle line, that's the shop I'm going to use to dummy up. If I know they're copying Circa for MMA, I'm going to dummy up Circa's MMA. If I know they're piggybacking, Westgate's NFL, I'm going to make sure I use Westgate to dummy some NFL up. So that happens a lot. Got to be cautious.
Okay, that's interesting. So what he's saying there is that whatever major book is the one that is like the trend setter for the overall lines, like if this is the one that everyone's looking at and taking the information from, then bettors will go to that book and start pumping numbers up over there to manipulate all of the books across the board. Because if they're the one that is setting the tone for everything, then you manipulate that, and the tone is now manipulated across the board. That's very interesting.
Yeah, that's great info.
Yeah, I arbitraged for a couple weeks, and
yeah,
let's just say I learned my lesson.
Yeah,
that it's not worth it. It's much more worth to have your books.
They make it too hard. But I don't know. I just got to share this. I'm sorry. I know there's a lot probably guys waiting to jump on here, but if you get a chance, Breaking Points. I don't know if you know that show. It's Breaking Points. They talk like politics, all kind of stuff. Anyway, Google Breaking Points segment on sports betting. They interviewed the top exec from FanDuel that actually went on the record. Few guys have ever done this because he's an ex-top exec, went on the record, gave his name as well, and talked about all the stuff that the sports books are doing right now to separate people from their money. It's such unbelievable that the stuff he shares, the stuff that they're doing to separate young people from their money. He was saying, like, in boardrooms, they're talking about it like this isn't even fair. Like, maybe we should give them a little better odds on the parlays because we're separating them from their money too fast. Like, seriously, like the conversation is like they have 0-0 chance. Should we give them maybe like a 0.5% chance so that maybe we don't bury them in a month? Like maybe their lifespan is 3 months instead. Those are the conversations. And how bad how much money they're making on these parlays is so ridiculous. It's like to them, it's the new. They fear that they're almost like how it was with the opioid epidemic, where they knew that family knew that it was addicted, and yet they said it wasn't. With and they're saying the same thing here, where like they're promoting the parlays and they're getting all these celebrities and high profile people to push the narrative that this is how you can get rich. You could get wealthy. You could make a lot of money betting sports, when the truth is that they were saying, like, execs laugh, like nobody does it. Like it's just I think they wrote a book. It's called Everybody Loses or something like that. And it's about this guy from FanDuel that shared all the stuff that they do. If you get a chance, watch that segment. It's crazy, bro. It's crazy.
Well, so there you go. Yeah. And that is exactly why we've got this right here. I've been full screening these. Sorry, I can full screen this stuff. But we will, we're going to watch this now. This is exactly what he is talking about. Yeah, arbitrage betting is what they're talking about. Yeah, exactly. And so apparently this is a major issue that manipulates a lot of how this betting goes around and makes it so that this is essentially a rigged game. So, of course, as Yanni just queued up there, this is Breaking Points. This is the show that he was talking about. And I have not seen this, so I'm very interested to see what this is all about and kind of hear some of this information from this former FanDuel executive. Because this is all stuff that, we have massive amounts of money that are being bet when it comes to the MMA space. And now we're also seeing that we're having manipulation of the actual fights themselves in the sense of the betting lines when it comes to the insider information that is being leaked. And again, to set all of this up, just going from the start of where we started with all of this on this stream to now, you have a fighter that is compromised. You have a member of their team. Who is it? Which member is it? How do you know? I mean, in this case, we found out that if it was through Instagram, there's probably a way to trace that, of course, with messages being saved and whatnot. But let's say that this was not the Alexander Hernandez situation. Let's say that this was just any random fighter. You have a fighter who is coming in injured, had a bad weight cut, some undisclosed compromised element of it, had lost a family member, has a divorce proceedings, baby mama drama, whatever it is. Any situation that you can think of that is making it so that fighter is not at 100%. Member of their team uses some kind of communication method, maybe not Instagram, like I said, maybe Telegram or some dark web type of situation, or whatever encrypted methods of communication you might be able to have, and gets that information out there into the public. Now that information starts moving the lines. And you have people who are not as deep into this culture taking that information and just saying, oh, okay, well, or maybe not taking that information, but just not aware of that and having money on what they thought was a legitimate fight. And now they're set up to fail because they're not as deep as we are, or as deep as other people might be. So this is a situation I think that is very disturbing when it comes to the integrity of MMA. Again, MMA as well, being that it's a single person sport, there's a lot less that can happen, but also a lot more that can happen when it comes to how fights are manipulated. Chase, my co-host on last week's Fights, has said, where is the line when it comes to fight manipulation and fight fixing? Because you could have a fight like Umar versus Figueiredo, where Figueiredo basically just fought poor enough to lose by decision, but Umar didn't fight well enough to do anything beyond taking it to decision. So if you had that by decision, and let's say that Figueiredo, for example, this is just, of course, just a hypothetical example, but say that for Figueiredo was specifically trying to get to a decision loss, that were, or get the fight to decision, period. You know, will this fight go the distance is the bet. Figueiredo intentionally tries to hold back so that there are no potential finishes. You know, does just well enough to not get submitted, probably not going to get knocked out by Umar, but still, you know, keeps himself at distance so that there's no potential for, for knockout shots to land, that kind of thing. Goes to the ground, defends well enough so that he's not in any serious danger of being submitted. This fight goes to decision. How close to fight fixing is that? The fight was still, he still potentially could have lost. You know, he still potentially could have, potentially could have been finished. You know, if Umar was just that aggressive and went beyond, he still could have gotten a finish perhaps. But if his intention was to fight just enough to be in the fight, but not enough to allow himself to be in a finished position, then that could end up being a manipulation as well. And it's hard to lock down what the reality of any of that is and how deep any of these fighters are with the betting community to the point where that information could get out and be used to prop up the fighter that they're, or the fighter or the fight that they're trying to make the money off of. Hey, CTE, how are you, sir? Good to see you, bro. Wanted to say, CTE, I apologize for last night if I came off like a little bit of an asshole in the Discord. I was thinking back on that when I was like asking you if you were serious about the Bilal versus JDM fight. I didn't realize that people thought that was such a good fight. I thought you were memeing, so it was not me trying to intentionally be an asshole. I thought that was a meme because I didn't realize that people thought that was such an amazing fight. Because I remember it as being an okay fight with interesting elements to it because of Bilal striking more so than trying to wrestle. But again, I apologize if I came off like a little bit of a prick. All right, so let's get into breaking points here. And this will be the last thing that we're going to be watching today. This is the CEO or former CEO of FanDuel that is going to be exposing some of the insider information as to how the betting world operates and basically how we're essentially throwing money into the ocean. It's a no-win situation for the bettors, to the point where, as Yanni the Greek had just said, they're comparing it to the opioid epidemic with how easy it is to separate everyone from their money. TJF, how are you, sir? Are you going to stop gambling if concerns rise or just let it ride? I mean, I'm probably just going to let it ride, but that's the thing is that this is also a bit, I'm glad that you asked that, actually. This is another element of this. I will probably continue to gamble because I don't bet a large amount of money on it. I'm just betting based on the picks that we have in the chat and my own personal opinions about the fights. I'm betting for the validation of getting it correct. I'm not betting to actually make money. That's a distinction between the way that I bet versus how people like how Yanni the Greek was describing it, where they're saying, oh, you could make so much money off of parlays. You could be rich getting these parlays correct. And that, I think, is another big element of this, is the advertising of how all of this works. You have these big celebrities and personalities that are pushing this. Oh, you put your bets down, $100 could win you $5,000, et cetera, et cetera. And they get these ideas in their head that, I can just put this money on these fights or this, whatever sporting event it is, put this money in sports betting, and all of a sudden I could be a wealthy person. See, I think that is, it goes hand in hand with the problem, is how they're presenting the problem. You know what I mean? That how they're presenting the circumstances of the problem. Because I think that's one of the things that people think is, if the lines are unmanipulated and I am just that savvy that I can get all of these things to hit together, then yeah, there's massive amounts of money to be made here. Where what we're really seeing is that the majority of the time, the probabilities of getting these parlays correct, even for savvy bettors, is still not great. I mean, generally, I think for a very savvy bettor, if you are in like the top maybe 1% of the betting population, your correct rate is generally around 70%. So you're still, we're not talking about massive probabilities as far as being correct consistently. So 70% potential to get your parlay correct. That's if everything is equal. So you take that 70% if everything is equal, and then you pair it with the manipulation. This is throwing money into a furnace. You ever see the Fairly Odd Parents meme where it's the guys and they're shoveling the money into the furnace? That's what it feels like. So I probably will still place the community parlay and the little bets that I place just so that I have a parlay to talk about on the stream or whatever. But again, I'm placing very, very small amounts of money on this, and it's really more so just to be like, see, I was right. Very rarely is the case. Of course, I know that I am not great at predicting fights, and I never claim to be. But for people who are actually trying to make money off of this, for as much as me and E-Money J go back and forth, I do give E-Money J some credit because I think that his method is probably about as good as you're going to get when he does the round robin. Because basically what a round robin is that you have multiple parlays that are made out of, like, if you pick 8 legs to your parlay, you're basically making individual parlays out of those multiple combinations of the 8 legs. So if you lose 1 or 2, you can still make money off of the overall picture because your buy-in is a lot higher, but you're parlaying a whole lot of different combinations. So potentially, if you get enough right, you still could make money on the back end. And that's about as good as I think you're going to get, because straight betting is always going to be the way that you're going to probably hit the most. It's smaller money and it takes longer to actually make anything off of that. But parlays, and like if you're going to continue doing parlays, the round robin is probably as good as you're going to get, because regular parlays they're just going to be too unpredictable, and then you also have the manipulation on top of it. No, you're all good. I was just surprised you didn't think of it highly. Yeah, no, I'm surprised the opposite direction. I thought it was a good, not great fight that was essentially a one-sided performance for JDM because Bilal navigated it poorly, even though I thought his striking was pretty good. I mean, I know that I was in the crazy minority that actually thought that Bilal won a good couple of those rounds and that it was a closer fight than a lot of people thought that it was, but I don't know. You're stopping because you're losing too much money? Dude, good. Very good. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad that you recognize that you're losing too much money and are not digging yourself deeper. There's something called a sunk cost fallacy that a lot of people fall into, especially people with gambling problems. And that basically, the basics of that is that you get yourself so deep into a hole that you're trying to bet yourself just to get back to a break-even point. And that is, as the name would suggest, a fallacy. You should not be digging yourself deeper just to try to get back to level ground. So, all right, let's hear what Breaking Points has to say here.
He's the author of a new book. Let's put it up here on the screen. Everybody Loses: The Tumultuous Rise of American Sports Gambling. Topic near and dear to my heart, Danny, and it already seems from some of the excerpts that have been released that it backs up much of the reporting out there about the exploitative way that these companies run, how they're able to limit winners, how they are able to dramatically exploit some of the losers, the so-called whales, how they manage their internal risk, their own PR strategy. So why don't you give the audience a little bit of a taste here of some of the revelations that you found while you're reporting out this book?
Yeah, even though, as you were saying, some of the predatory tactics the industry uses have been covered, I think there are certain details I was able to find that'll blow people away, particularly things that people within the industry admitted.
So I thought this was actually the executive himself. So I guess this is the author of this book. But I mean, probably even better to have the author of the book than the executive himself, because the author is going to give us more context and probably be a little bit more open and forthright with some of that information than somebody, even if they are a former executive, somebody who is still somewhat connected to the industry at all in some capacity. I mean, even if he's not in that job anymore, he probably still has a lot of ties to it. So this author is probably a better source than the executive themselves. Savage, how are you, sir? Damn, I'm late to the stream, but I'll be lurking. I'm glad we never bet with big money anyways. Exactly, Savage, yes. I mean, I think that might be the ultimate takeaway from all of this is just, bet with tremendous caution if you're going to bet at all. And really, the only way to win is not to play. But if you're going to take the gamble and roll the dice, then do it with very short amounts of money. Never bet more than you are able to lose. That is always, that's key number one, regardless of anything else.
Saying, their advertising is untruthful. They're suggesting that you can win, but you can't. That was from the former CEO of FanDuel. Another high up at FanDuel told me that the way that parlays just annihilate customers reminded him of when he was a military contractor helping warships be more lethal. And he sort of had ambivalence about, he wants to help FanDuel make money, but is destroying customers at that rate really the right thing to be doing?
I mean, think about that in and of itself. The former CEO of FanDuel was formerly before that a military contractor who was optimizing warships. That's kind of wild. So this guy goes from the military industrial complex to the the private sector and into the betting world to take the tactics and the methodology that he applied to lethal wartime engagements to the betting culture that trickles down to Joe and Jane American. I mean, we're already in some dicey territory here, people.
So a lot of revelations from all sorts of people around this field, but I'm particularly proud that so many people within the industry wanted to speak up for this book.
So can you dig into that a little bit more for people who haven't followed it closely? When you have the former, FanDuel CEO, you said, saying, like, we tell people they can win, but really you can't. What do they mean specifically by that? What do they do to engineer the outcome where over a long period of, you are not going to win in any significant amount anyway?
Right. So as much as the house always wins is such an axiom of the gambling business, there's something about sports betting where you think, I know my team or my league better than whoever's setting the odds. I can outsmart them. And the advertising from these companies totally reinforces that. It's so on the nose that they're saying betting on sports is a way to make money. Surveys of customers back that up. And yet it goes beyond the house edge. I remember speaking with someone who was an executive at a company that builds these micro bets. So nowadays you can not only bet on who's going to win or even prop bets like how many touchdowns will my favorite quarterback throw, but literally every play has become an opportunity for betting. Will this play result in a score or not? Things like that. And this guy who's a micro betting executive said, we recognize that fans are predisposed to think positive outcomes will happen. So you're going to hope your team scores more than you're going to hope they punt in a football game. And we're going to shade the odds, as they put it, so that those positive outcomes pay out less. And he sort of thought about it for a moment and said, we're kind of taxing the casuals with that shading.
Yo, this dude, I mean, I don't know if this guy or if the executive he's talking about realize how applicable all this is to MMA. But everything that he just said there, literally every single thing, aside from the micro betting part, because I mean, maybe that's already in MMA and I don't know about it. But right there, everything that he said is 100% applicable to MMA, saying that you know your fighter better than the books know your fighter. You know this sport better than the book knows the sport. And granted, I mean, having a show and a podcast like I do, you'd think that would be the case. I am I've certainly gotten myself to a position and an age and a level of enlightenment to know that I don't know shit about anything, and that should always be the prevailing thought for across the board, not just for yelling about mixed martial arts, but all of these shows that you're watching. Is that you think that anybody has the edge? All of these companies, all they do all day long is sit around with algorithmic analysis and a team of hundreds of people to make sure that your edge is their edge. Like any edge that you think that you have, they are 2 steps ahead of that. So that's point number 1. Now, point number 2, as far as the predisposition to positive outcomes, that's what we try to negate, I think, a lot of times as fans, is to be like, oh, well, we are 1 step ahead of that. We know that the book is going to be dangling the money in this way and this and that, but they account for that as well. So, for the casuals there, what he's saying, that might be the case. Like, for the casual fan, they're going to be, oh, I like X fighter. I feel that I have a kindred spirit with Max Holloway. You know what I mean? I'm a big Max Holloway fan. So of course Max is going to land, more than X amount of punches. Of course, Max is going to stuff X amount of takedowns and that kind of stuff. So they factor that in. So all of these elements that they're describing here, 100% applicable to MMA, and speaking to the psychology of MMA fans, both in the hardcore and casual spheres.
And I just thought, man, the leagues and even these sports books have said betting is a way to enhance fandom. It just makes you more on the edge of your seat, more locked into the game. At the same time, they're very explicitly taking advantage of your weaknesses as a fan, just to drive up their margins. So
yeah, I mean, there is definitely something to that as well. The idea that, if you don't care about a fight, let's say it's the Rose versus Natalia Silva fight. Probably a good example of this, I would suspect, especially based on what that fight ended up becoming. Fans, there's a prevailing thought in MMA that women's MMA is not as entertaining. It's something that people you often hear the memes about it, bathroom break fights and all of that. If you don't care about that fight, you put a little bit of money down on it. Now you care more. It gives you an incentive to want to watch. I've got $5 on Natalia Silva to win this fight now. Obviously, I'm going to be locked in. Obviously, I'm going to be rooting for Natalia Silva, so that kind of thing. So, of course, that from the book side, he's saying a little bit predatory. It's, they're presenting it as, oh, it's just a way to, get you more connected to the sport that you enjoy. But to them, it's a way to part you with your money.
That, as basic as it is, was telling, I thought, of just how this industry works and how ruthless they can be.
Danny, some of the things that I have tried to hammer home, specifically about this parlay bet, is that many people have an antiquated notion about sports gambling as if it's exactly the same as it used to be, let's say whenever it was illegal. The truth is that these specific types of parlays, multi-player bets, 2 touchdowns, combinations, have never existed before. And they are by far the most profitable engine for these gambling companies. You said that they remind people of a war executive, for example, of annihilating the enemy. And the profits actually bear that out for these companies. Could you detail what you found specifically about these parlay bets, which are the most popular on all of these platforms, and how they work to specifically exploit many of these fans?
Right. I'm glad you brought that up because there's a lot of ways in which the industry will say, there's always been illegal betting. We've just brought it out of the black market. Sure, there's some truth to that, but the online betting industry is a whole new ballgame, partly because just betting on your phone, 95% of this business is now conducted online. So online betting opens the doors to such more complexity with how you're betting. And the menu of things you can bet on has just exploded, where there are thousands of things you can bet on within a single game. Parlays are now all some people bet on, especially young people. The idea that you can combine a bunch of things, if they all hit, you'll make a lot of money. You might bet $10 for the chance at winning $300. You could understand how appealing that is. But 30% of bets are parlays, and about 60% of revenue comes from parlays.
Wow.
They tend to hold for every $100 you bet, the house holds about $30 in revenue. The traditional margin for sports betting was like $5 for every 100 wagered. And what that same guy who used to work at FanDuel, his name is Nick Bonadio. So I'm happy a lot of guys put their names behind these quotes. Said, customers have this assumption that I'll bet that $10 bet to win 300. And if I hit one of those bets, it's going to pay for all my losers. It doesn't work that way. The odds are so bad for those bets over time. It's why it's so profitable. He said, and I remember this quote, he said, not to be condescending, but I think maybe 5% of customers understand that the odds are actually so bad that these are sucker bets, essentially.
Yo, I mean, putting it all out on Front Street. I mean, this is exactly what you see. And I mean, you'll see it from, I mean, of course, I'm not trying to cast any aspersion or shade on anyone in the chat, but what I say is that you see the way that people pick specific things and you hear how I respond to it. You'll see people say, oh, okay, I'm taking Patty by sub in the third. What you are doing with that, and now, I mean, granted, that's one leg of everything, right? So you're saying that Patty by sub in the third. So part number one is Patty Pimblett. Part number two is by submission. So now you have it. The odds have to be, I don't know the numbers on the actual percentages, but the point is that there is a specific amount of odds placed on Patty Pimblett to win the fight. There are a specific amount of odds to Patty Pimblett to win the fight by submission. You're making it more unlikely with every qualifier that you add to it. So Patty Pimblett, submission, third round, you've now expanded the probability of that not happening by all of the qualifiers that you've just added to it. The probability of Patty Pimblett winning the fight, the probability of Patty Pimblett winning the fight by submission, the probability of Patty Pimblett winning the fight by submission in the third round. You've now taken what could have just been Patty Pimblett to win the fight, which could be, essentially a coin flip at its most fair, if it wasn't for all of the factors that go into that, as for the dynamics of the people and all of those things. You've now expanded that exponentially by adding those qualifiers to it. So you take that now exponential qualified bet, or this bet that now has a crazy long shot attached to it, and you then parlay that with other bets that are similar in their likelihood of probability to come out. You've essentially created what he called a sucker bet. You've got Patty Pimblett to win in the third round by submission, plus Davison Figueiredo to knock out Umar in the fourth. The likelihood of those two things both happening with those set of parameters is extremely unlikely. And that is what a lot of people are doing. And they're not necessarily realizing that the more that you add to the bet, the more strictness that you get down to the bet. A lot of people just see the number. They just see that it's, that's at plus 205. That's at plus 300 for that to happen. Man, if that hits, that would be a crazy payday. But it's never going to hit. So that's why I always say the value of the bet, when people say, such and such at plus money, that's a great bet. It's only a great bet if that plus money comes through. So what is the actuality of it? What is the likelihood of it actually happening? And that always needs to be the firm starting point for all of this, is that what is actually going to happen? Because if the long shot of it, and that being like, it could happen, that's crazy that they're putting that out there like that because it could happen. Yeah, it's only good if it does happen. If not, it was a good bet. It would have been cool if it worked out. Oh, well, in a perfect world, every bet hits.
And yet, as I was saying, it's sometimes exclusively how people now wager on sports.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit more too about prop bets, where you can, not just bet on like the outcome of the game, but you can bet on how much one particular player is going to score in one particular quarter. I mean, with these very specific things. And of course, that makes it easier for those players and people who are involved in the league to get in on, rigging those bets. So how widespread is this? And how much has it undercut the legitimacy of the games that we're watching?
Totally. I mean, the most notorious fixing scandal is the 1919 World Series, 8 members of the Chicago White Sox throwing baseball's championship.
I really wish that he had just said the Bulgarian situation. That would have been really funny.
People say, there would never be another Black Sox scandal. That's true, but you wouldn't need 8 players now to collude to throw the World Series in order to make a lot of money. A single bench player, as we've seen, or even a more established player than that, can influence one play through these prop bets and make a fortune for them or their friends. Emmanuel Clase, one of the top relief pitchers in baseball, was arrested at the end of last year, allegedly for just intentionally throwing a couple of pitches as balls. He texted someone from the bullpen and said, "Heads up, I'm going to spike a slider to start this inning." And that was very profitable, allegedly, for him and his partner in that.
That's another good thing to note here when he's talking about these micro bets. Like, what he just said is very true. And it really very applicable to MMA based on what we were just talking about with if you trace back what happened with the Hernandez situation. Like, with that, what he just described in baseball, when it comes down to the micro betting, these are things that happen so quickly that the algorithms, I'm sure, are very optimized when it comes to flagging these things. And that's obviously why this pitcher that he's talking about was arrested. But the likelihood of being able to catch every single one of those becomes so much more difficult for these oversight organizations. And when you take it down to that micro level where betting is happening literally multiple times per minute in a match, in this case baseball, but in MMA, if you go round by round, think about how many rounds you have in an MMA event. UFC event has, let's just say, 10 fights. So 3 times 9, 18, 27, and then 5 for the main is 39, right? Somewhere around there, right? Not 27 plus 5, no, 32, excuse me. I'm not great at math. But you know what I'm saying? You get my point, is that if you break it down round by round, you have 32 rounds in a 10 fight card. Just as an example, 32 rounds, you have 2 fighters per round. So double that as to the things that can happen. Now you take into the account how many takedowns per round, how many punches thrown per round. Will there be a foul per round? You see how many different things there are to keep account of. So to say that, again, let's take it down to a low level here. Let's say that I'm Derek Lewis and I'm a person who's open about, the whole foul situation, right? Derek Lewis came out and said, if I need a little extra time, I'll knee the guy in the nuts. Let's say that Derek Lewis is going to do that in the first round, and he knows that he's going to do that, and he tells his team, "Hey, I'm coming out the gate. I'm going to knee this guy in the nuts." Will there be a foul in the first round? That could be insanely profitable when he does that foul. Will there be a foul in the first round, plus minus whatever it ends up being? You put $10,000 down that there's going to be a foul in the first round. There's the money.
Again, it also relates to parlays, because when you can stack those sorts of bets together, you can make hundreds of thousands of dollars on the most obscure bets. Jonte Porter, the most obscure player we could think of in the NBA, a two-way bench player on the Toronto Raptors, was arrested and ultimately convicted for removing himself from a couple of games, pretending he had an injury, so that those prop bets on his points and rebounds and assists and things like that would go under. That was, something that people were betting hundreds of thousands of dollars to win on. And I hear bookmakers so upset about that, who've been at this for a long time, because they would never have dreamed of letting you stand to win hundreds of thousands of bucks on a guy like Jonte Porter. They knew that was ripe for fixing. It was so corruptible. And yet, because the online business is, their biggest moneymaker is these parlays, They've rushed into offering as many ways of building parlays as possible and accepted that a price you might pay for that is the corruption of sports.
Man, again, it's crazy. This is actually very eye-opening, all of this, that now the books are just accepting that there's going to be corruption. So as I said, go back to the title of this stream. Is this the new normal? If the books are accepting it, then it's got to be the new normal. The FBI is hardly doing anything about it. We still have not gotten any actual repercussions or adjudication of any type based on the Shilan Nordenbeke situation from years ago now. Isaac Bulgarian, that's going to be in, they said, they're wrapping that up into the Shilan Nordenbeke investigation. How long are these investigations going to go on for? Now you've got Alex Hernandez's team involved with an investigation. Does that just get wrapped up into all of that? So how many times are you just going to keep rolling over all of these corruptions into new investigations and nothing ever happens? So the books are just like, oh, okay, well, if that's the case, then I guess we're just going to have to deal with it. And then make it so that we have 8,000 other ways to take the money away from people, because for every one corrupt player that's going to lose us hundreds of thousands of dollars, we have X amount of other ways to get millions of dollars from all of these people betting on these different versions of props and parlays. Crazy. This is crazy stuff.
Danny, can you talk about the media here? Because I think that actually might be one of the worst elements. Is I would be remiss to think of a single national sports personality who is not in league with the gambling companies at a basic advertising level, either direct partnership with DraftKings, FanDuel, Hard Rock Bet, any of these points bet, any prize picks. If you pick even a cultural figure, a sports line figure, they are directly in league with the gambling companies. What do you think that does for coverage of the sport? You, for example, had an excerpt from your book went quite viral about Bill Simmons over at The Ringer.
Yeah, I'd love to get into that. But the first name that popped in my head was Bob Costas, who spoke with me. And his father had a gambling problem, he told me. And so when he was calling baseball games and they wanted him to tout parlays or read sportsbook ads, he said, I just don't feel comfortable doing that. And they gave him a pass. The takeaway, I think, is you need to be a 30-time Emmy winner, a legend of broadcasting, to be able to opt out of that. It's just become a fact of life for so many journalists. But at the same time, I don't want to let people like Bill Simmons off the hook, because they've made millions and millions of dollars by hawking sports books, normalizing the idea that firing all these parlays and low odds prop bets is just the way to be a sports fan nowadays. The influence of that on making this the default way of engaging with sports can't be understated. A consequence of it, besides just giving the impression that this is a harmless no big deal way of being a fan now, is it also handcuffs a lot of sports outlets that could be reporting on the dangers of betting, rising addiction, the risks of corruption we were just talking about. All of that, you'll be watching sports networks and feel like there's a conspicuous silence about that stuff. Mm-hmm. Even with Bill Simmons, as I wrote about in the book, this guy who has burnt a reputation as this defiant truth teller, when Jonte Porter was arrested, or when other games that I know he cares a lot about were exposed to have fixing scandals, he's very, kind of tongue-tied and, really watching his words in a way that he doesn't typically. And I think it's because FanDuel is one of his biggest sponsors.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a very good point. I guess that Yama should never be expecting any kind of sponsorship from any of these books based on all of the analysis that I do about all of this. Has there been any news at all on James Krause and Derek Minner since it happened? Well, no. So, okay. And also I should clarify as well that yes, Derek Minner is the fighter who was actually doing the throwing in that fight. It was not Shilan Nordenbeke. I've been using Shilan Nordenbeke when I've been talking about that, but he was the other side of that fight. It was Derek Minner, who's the fighter that was actually involved on the corruption side of it, quote unquote, or I guess allegedly. I mean, what we should say is that he was the fighter that was compromised. So hopefully that clears that up a little bit. I should have been a little bit more clear about that. But no, the answer is no. The only thing that we have heard is that now that the Bulgarian investigation is wrapped up into that. But no, there's been none there as far as any kind of actual news of any action taking place. All that we know is that really there was potential ties to James Krause in the Bulgarian situation as well, with Iridium Sports and all of that. I did an entire breakdown on that on the channel if you want to check that out. But no, there has not been any actual consequence or any kind of even real legal proceedings that have come from that just yet. And this is now going on multiple years at this point. So that's my point, is that all of this goes on for so long without any kind of actual action being taken. Of course, there are many circumstances as to why the current administration and FBI might not be utilizing their resources for this type of an investigation or this type of action. A lot on their plate, so to speak. But either way, it really just reinforces the fact that it almost reminds me a lot of the crypto space, where it's like all of these people are doing all of these massively underhanded and very nefarious things. And if there are no consequences to it, then what's to stop anybody? Again, this is why I have titled the stream the way that I did. Is this the new normal? Is because it feels like this very well might be the new normal. You've got oversight that is basically just trying to play whack-a-mole to stop the betting action from ever taking place, and that's as good as they're going to do. You know, when the UFC canceled the Hernandez versus Johnson fight, that's what I'm talking about. You know, instead of letting the fight go on like they did with Isaac Bulgarian, they said, okay, no, we had this Bulgarian situation recently. We don't want any more of that. You know, it's negative attention to the organization, so we're just not going to let that go on. That seems to be as good as you are going to get unless there are actual consequences for any of this. So, yeah, that's the short answer. And I'm glad that you brought up Derek Minner, because that's an important note as I've been referring to all of the earlier scandals and all of that.
And that's true of so much of the media. And just lastly, I'll quote a former ESPN reporter named Henry Abbott, who said, when you think about all that, sports media is really being bribed by all this advertising dollars. The bribe is, we'll give you millions and millions of dollars, and in exchange, don't say anything that would either embarrass these sports books or embarrass the leagues for partnering with them and profiting so handsomely from this betting explosion.
That's what I was starting to say. Yeah, this is absolutely the truth. I mean, every time that there is a partnership that is forged between a betting organization and what is thought to be a reputable news outlet, when it comes to reporting on the sports field, you're taking away a piece of the integrity of the reporting of that organization. And he's very much not wrong here. I mean, like these, you know, when scandals break, I mean, look at the reporting on the Minner situation, on the Bulgarian situation, and now on the Hernandez situation. You get very surface level reporting about it because it is a thing that happened in the world. You know, it is a thing that needs to be talked about in some capacity, or people would be like, why are you not talking about this? So yes, they know that they have to talk about it at all. There has to be some type of conversation about it. But when it comes to any kind of deeper analysis or critical conversation that these people could be having and raising concerns about what this is doing to the integrity of their sports, specifically to MMA here, crickets, essentially. You're not getting any of that because a lot of these books are tied to these organizations, and it would be bad for business. I think that this is a pretty easy thing to understand. So, yeah, this is an unfortunate thing as well. And again, you know, I say all of this knowing that, yeah, you know, I am probably potentially, when, you know, if the channel ends up getting big enough, potentially missing out on lots and lots of money from sports books because they don't want to hear the type of the things that I am saying. But it is what it is. You know what I mean? Like, I would rather actually have a voice in this conversation than sell out that way because no one else is going to. And I feel like it is somewhat predatory the way that all of these things are being presented by the books.
Talk a little bit more about that human cost. How is this? You're a fallible human being, and you're up against this giant business that is spending as much money as it needs to get you hooked, to trick you, to make sure that you always lose. What is the cost that this has had for people?
We're seeing addiction rates rise. The expectation for a long time had been that about 1 or maybe even 2% of the population is prone to a gambling problem. In states that have legalized it, health experts believe it's closer to 6 or 8%.
Wow.
Among young men who are the target demo, it's much higher. As bad as that is, and I tell some really heartbreaking stories in the book of the most ordinary people who seem like they're smart and know about sports and wouldn't, get themselves down that road. I also think that people can hear addiction stories and say, well, that doesn't apply to me. Like, that's sad, but I don't have a gambling problem. And what we're seeing is such pervasive rates of problematic gambling, even if you don't have a clinically diagnosable problem. And what I mean by that is a third of gamblers saying they've felt ashamed after how much money they've lost. Half of gamblers saying they've lost money and then bet to try to make up for it, what's called chasing losses, a telltale sign of a gambling problem. Half of sports bettors admit to that.
Wow.
You also see research that in a very scientific way has demonstrated that in states that have legalized sports betting, there are higher bankruptcy rates, worse credit scores, worse family savings. I hate to even bring this up, but higher rates of domestic violence compared to states that haven't legalized. So, you might be thinking, I bet $50 here, $100 there. These products are engineered to get you to get carried away, to get you in over your heads. And you might look up and say, how did I lose thousands of bucks this season? That's what they are, masterminds at getting you to overdo it.
So, I mean, look, when it comes to some of these correlations, I think there might be a little bit of spuriousness. It's hard for me to accept. I mean, maybe, look, I don't know the actual details, so it very well could be that this is the case, and it just seems that it's a hard thing to intellectualize, but it would seem that correlating domestic violence to sports betting is a little bit of a stretch, but in a general sense of what he's saying, I do think that there is a good amount of validity. We see it. TJF was literally just saying earlier, I'm not betting anymore because I've lost too much money. Kind of goes to exactly what he said. People saying and feeling that they lost too much on betting, and that's something that they're not okay with. These are legitimate problems for some people, even if they are not problems for every person. And that's why I've always been very cautious about betting ever. Like even before doing Yama, I was always very cautious about wagering too much because it's not a road that I want to go down. And I think people's perception of money is not always healthy. And they feel like, this is going to be okay when it might not be okay for them. So the more that this is permeating society and the more that sports betting becomes more normalized, the more that there is potential for people to develop problems with it. And you're seeing that in real time with the stats that they're talking about. Some of it might go a little bit overboard in what they're tying it to, but the general sentiment seems to be correct.
And that's the last thing I really wanted to get you to expound on is something that I've, again, tried to emphasize over and over, is that these companies literally could not operate if it was a level playing field. So if winners, people who are good at betting, could actually bet, then they would not be able to operate. The only way to remain highly profitable is to limit the winners, the so-called sharp bettors, and massively exploit the so-called problem gamblers who make up the vast majority of their revenue. One thing actually I'd love your reaction to. Can we put this E3, please, up on the screen? I mean, we have an example here of how a company in March 2024, PointsBet, raised its share of online gambling revenue in New Jersey from 11% to 24% after wooing a single cash customer away from DraftKings. So that is, I mean, this is what is called a whale. And
That's crazy. That's crazy. If one person could shift their margin that high, that's a wild thing. I also wanted to stop to see what this was. The battle to stop clever people betting, the tools bookmakers use to block data-savvy gamblers and how to get around them. Interesting. Again, people think, oh, you know, I'm smarter than the book. I can't believe that that Vegas is dangling this or whatever. They are aware of everything that they are doing at all times. So thinking that you are going to be the person to outsmart the book is just it's a fallacy in and of itself that really, I mean, maybe, you know, like there are some of these sharp bettors that are able to get it some of the time, but you can get it some of the time. There's no way you can get it all of the time. And if you get it all of the time, you are going to be stamped out in a major way. I have heard stories. I don't have an example of it right now, but I have heard stories of people who have done so well with sports betting that they've been blocked from their books and can't take their money out. Like that to me is a massive problem. I mean, that should be actionable legally in my estimation. That's a fraud situation as far as I'm concerned. But again, if there's no actual repercussions for anything, you think if there's no repercussions for the actual individuals who are involved in fixing and any of these kinds of things, do you think that there are going to be any repercussions for the books where there are hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars flowing in and out at all times? There's no way that there's going to be anything coming down on the actual organizations. So yeah, you get screwed over by your book, you're going to have to sit there and eat it. It's kind of crazy. Imposing limits/restrictions on profitable accounts should be illegal. Yes, exactly. That's what I'm saying. That's a fraud situation in my estimation. You're saying you can come in and place this bet, and what you are assuming within that, what you are expecting out of that is to have your money paid to you. That if you are not paid that money that you have now essentially earned, that you have won in a fair manner from the book, if they don't pay that out, that is fraud. You were fraudulently lied to in thinking that you would place this bet and it would be paid back to you. You're paid out to you, rather. Hey, John Dong, how you doing, brother?
Another thing that you detail in your book is how many of these, you know, so-called whales, I would call them gambling addicts, with just money to lose, are showered with VIP hosts, phone calls, gifts. So could you just expound, you know, a little bit on that, on how, in many ways, the so-called best customers, aka the addicts, are the ones who are, you know, get all of these benefits supposedly while they throw away all their money, and then the people who are actually winning, as they advertise that they can do, get limited almost immediately when they join the platform.
Yeah, it's so galling. You know, that single customer, I spent a lot of time trying to track down who they are because they've lost over $100 million. They're maybe the biggest loser of the legal online betting era.
Wow.
The closest I could get is that they have inherited oil wealth.
It's Drake. It's got to be Drake. Obviously, I'm joking. We all know that Drake doesn't gamble with his own money. That's just a little ha-ha funny joke. Got here late, was shoveling snow. Damn, dude. Yeah, I've heard that everybody's getting a lot of snow out there, bro. Sorry to hear that. I hope everybody's dealing with the snow as best as possible. But yeah, I feel very bad for you guys up in the north having to deal with the snow. I haven't been outside yet today. I don't know if it's how it's here in Florida, but I would assume that we do not have anything even close to that. Snow is as thick as Patty's head here. Damn, dude. Yeah, no, I've been hearing it across the board. Yeah, Chase posted a picture in the Discord today of all the snow that they got in Cincinnati, and it's a lot. It's a lot. So I feel for you guys dealing with that snow. Very beautiful, but who cares when you have to deal with it?
But I don't know anything beyond that. But that side of the business, catering to VIPs, as they call it, people who lose at minimum tens of thousands of dollars on a weekly basis. I'd been covering this for years. I didn't even realize how huge that is, that about 2% of customers make up 60 or 70% of revenue. And those people, as a result, get pampered in the most extravagant ways imaginable, particularly if you're a sports fan. Like, getting to throw out the first pitch at a game, at a baseball game, getting to play pickup basketball in an NBA court, getting to have your kids take batting practice at a big league field. I could go on for a long time. It's nuts. But it's also ruthless because as soon as you either pull back a little bit and say, "Hey, I'm getting carried away. Let me chill out for a minute," or you start winning, all of those perks disappear.
Yes.
There was one VIP in Ohio who said, "I love the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're coming to Cleveland. Fanatics, would you get me seats?" He's a VIP at Fanatics. They said, "Absolutely, we got you." The game came around. He said, "Hey, could you throw in a parking pass?" And they said, "Yeah, unfortunately, we've been seeing that the way you've been betting on football no longer qualifies you to be a VIP. We had to revoke those tickets. But if you go back to the way that you were betting when we gave you these VIP privileges, maybe we can think of a way to make this up to you down the road."
Wow.
But he hadn't broken any rules.
He was
no
just
terms
winning.
and conditions.
Yeah.
He was just winning, or even just placing smart bets,
Yeah.
and that disqualified him in their eyes.
That's great. You're doing too good or you're not betting enough. I wonder, I was going to stop that earlier. I wonder what, if any, the UFC version of that is. Like, do they have a UFC perk of some sort? Like, do you get to go meet the fighters? Do you get to, go to the UFC X or whatever, the fan events and that kind of stuff? VIP. Now that we've got the Meta Apex, are you going to get VIP seats to the Apex? Things like that. So there's definitely tons of applicability when it comes to MMA with all of this. And yeah, I'd be very curious about like how that plays into the MMA space. Like, I'm sure there's got to be MMA whales that are putting crazy amounts of bets on. And how does that all play into the bigger picture? It's an interesting question.
Wow. Well, the book is Everybody Loses. Danny Funt, thank you so much. So great to have your insights, and congratulations. I think it's such an important topic.
Thank you, Danny. Appreciate it. We'll have a link down in the description. Everybody can go purchase the book.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Take care.
Our pleasure.
Hey, if you like that.
All right, so there you go. Yeah, so I mean, really, I think that kind of takes us to the end of everything that I wanted to talk about. Granted, I mean, do I have an answer for, is this the new normal? I think that we kind of got to the end point by saying it would appear to be that. I don't know how there's going to be any other kind of alterations to this equation that are going to make this a more fair and level playing field when the amount of money coming into the books is so much greater than what they're losing. Then there are corruptible individuals in all sports that are trying to make it so that they profit, or their team profits, or whatever, people that they are connected to profit from these things. It has gotten to a point with that now it overtakes the ability for there to be a stop to it. The people in power that are supposed to be overseeing and adding consequence to these situations when they arise are not doing that. It just seems like there's not going to be a fix to any of this. So really, my biggest takeaway, and what we'll end with all of this, is bet with caution, because this is a very rigged game, it would seem. And there are not going to be a lot of fixes in place as far as making it better. If anything, there are going to be more fixes in place, as in fixing of fights, as in fixing of outcomes of fights, as in what I described earlier, which could already be massively, massively prevalent that we don't even know about when it comes to things like I outlined with the Derek Lewis example. One person committing a foul in one round can make hundreds of thousands of dollars for the people that they're connected to if they know that it's going to happen ahead of time. So there's just too much money at stake and not enough oversight or ability for oversight to be implemented, it would seem. And that, I think, takes us basically to the ultimate conclusion that you should expect more and more situations like what we saw with the Alex Hernandez versus Michael Johnson fight, with the Isaac Dolgarians of the world. Probably that one to a little bit of a lesser extent, because that goes to an actual individual fighter taking the action on their own behalf, allegedly. But I doubt that there are going to be as many fighters throwing away their entire career for what Isaac Bulgarian ultimately stood to gain, especially now seeing that when it gets exposed that there's not actually going to be the windfall that they thought there was going to be. But still, I mean, insider information seems to be the currency when it comes to all of this. And for a guy to go in having a bad weight cut, or his girlfriend cheating on him, or, a broken thumb or something like that, or, a minor fracture in their thumb, or, a hairline fracture in their arm, or anything that is subdermal, anything that is under the radar that can be exploited by a member of their team. Again, you trace it. Fighter has an issue. Person on their team knows about the issue. Person on their team goes to somebody covertly, tells them that this is the case. That person places the bet, and now all of a sudden the entire fight is completely manipulated. Take Chase's example. A fighter goes in there fighting with one style, decides I'm going to abandon that game plan, fight with a different style. Is that a fix? It would seem so if somebody lets that be known. A guy who normally is going to wrestle is now only going to strike. Take the under on the takedowns. See what I'm saying here? These are the manipulations of the betting market, and thus the manipulation of the sport and sports in general. So that's really all that I wanted to say about all of that, and all the information that I had based on what we have now known about the Hernandez situation and all of the other ones before it. So yeah. All right. That being said then, thankfully, John, I'm glad that everything worked out with your snow situation. Appreciate you guys being here. Cookie Monster Trader, thank you for hanging out for this. That I very much appreciate you. John Dong as well, TJF, Beeb, Savage, all you guys, thank you very much for being here for this. I know a little bit of a shorter one, but really that's all that I really wanted to get to with it. So any which way, again, appreciate you guys. Go and watch the Roadhouse review, of course. We'll be on tomorrow. That's what I got to get to. I got to start rewatching all these fights for the podcast tomorrow. Podcast, last week's fights, myself and Chase Barton will be breaking down all of the fights from UFC 324, and more content coming throughout the week. I'm sure we'll get a watch along in, et cetera, et cetera. Plenty of stuff coming on the channel at all times. So you guys have a great rest of your weekend, and until tomorrow, fight on.
Change.